started. So I posted the link, but I think I need to post it again for anyone who came in later.
Joshua's singing with his 5 voices.
Okay. All right, there's a link to the source sheet. I will share it in a second.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, Parshat Beshalach, Shabbat Shira, very exciting stuff. Of course, the Shabbos is defined as one of Shira, of song. We read in Shul the Shirat Hayam, the song of the splitting of the sea, Az Yashir Moshe. The Haftorah is that from Devorah, Shirat Devorah, the song of Devorah. We'll get to those sources in a little bit. But I wanted to start with a fascinating and perhaps troubling scene closer to the beginning of the parsha. So the parsha begins, remember, end of last week, culmination of the 10 plagues. Paro tells Bnei Yisrael to leave, get out. And our parsha opens, Vayhi Beshalach Paro et Ha'am, and Paro sent the nation. So we are now out of Egypt. And of course, as things continue, we read that Paro again has a change of heart, or his heart is changed, and decides that he made a big mistake in letting the nation, the Israelites go, and he, his army chase after them. They come to the Yam Suf, the Red Sea, or more accurately, the Sea of Reeds, and we have this scene where Bnei Israel are literally trapped between the Egyptian army on one side and the sea on the other side. And that's where we're going to pick up in chapter 14, verse 10. Uparo hikriv, vayisu b'nei Yisrael et einehem v'hinei Mitzrayim nosea acharehem, vayir'u me'od, vayitzaku b'nei Yisrael el Hashem. Paro comes close to the nation. Bnei Yisrael open their eyes, they lift their eyes, and they see Egypt is chasing after them, and they're very scared, and they cry out to God. Vayomru el Moshe, Amibli ein kvarim b'Mitzrayim lekachtanu lamut b'midbar. Ma zot asita lanu lahotzianu miMitzrayim. And they say to Moshe, are there no graves in Egypt that you took us to die in the desert? What have you done by taking us out of Egypt? Halo zeh hadavar asher dibarnu elecha b'Mitzrayim le'mor. Chadal mimenu v'na'avda et Mitzrayim ki tov lanu avodat Mitzrayim mimutenu b'midbar. This is the exact thing we said to you in Egypt, that it's better that we serve Egypt, because it's better to serve Egypt than it is to die in the desert. Vayomer Moshe el ha'am, al tira'u, Ityatzu u'ru'at yishuat Hashem, asher ya'aseh lachem hayom, ki asher item et Mitzrayim hayom, lo tosifu lirotam od ad olam. Moshe says to the nation, do not be afraid, stand and see the salvation of God that he will do for you today. It's just as you see Egypt today, you will not see them again ever. Hashem yilachem lachem v'atem tacharishu. God will fight for you and you remain quiet. Vayomer Hashem al Moshe, ma titzak elai, daber b'nei Yisrael v'yisa'u. Response to this, what does God say to Moshe? What are you doing screaming out to me? Speak to the Bnei Yisrael and they should go forward. Okay, there's a lot going on in these few psukim.
Mm-hmm.
Where do these complaints of Bnei Yisrael come from? If you were part of Bnei Yisrael, right? We do this every Pesach, so let's pretend we're in Pesach, right? Chayav adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim. A person must every year on Pesach see him or herself as if they personally experienced the Exodus. You've just experienced the Exodus. You're now a week later standing at the banks of the Red Sea. What are you going to say in that situation?
Probably the same thing the Israelites said in the
Okay, so who thinks that they gave a, I don't want to say the right answer, we know that they're criticized for their response, but who would have given a similar type of response?
I would have fear.
Yes, certainly fear.
error. Yeah.
Anything else?
Maybe in frustration.
Okay. Remember what you just lived through. You just lived through 10 plagues. You just lived through, miracles, overt miracles taking place on a regular basis. Right? So it's plausible that we could have said, God will do another miracle for us. Right? Just as God saved us from Egypt, why won't God save us again now? But that's not what they say, and that doesn't seem to be that wasn't on anyone's plate.
It sounds like somebody's trying to attack Moshe, really, to me.
Yeah. So then there's also this complaint to Moshe, right? So it's interesting, right? First it says, "Vayitzaku b'nei Yisrael el Hashem." They screamed out to God. "Vayomru el Moshe." They said to Moshe. So is it one and the same, what they say to God and what they say to Moshe, or is there two separate conversations going on here?
I think it's definitely two different ones.
So what do you think they said to Hashem?
Well, I don't know, the way I see it in my mind's eyes, everybody turning to Moshe.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they're very afraid, so they're all looking at Moshe to see what's going to happen next. And I think that really raises the ire of those others who've been trying to get the position.
Okay. So already here, maybe this is foreshadowing future challenges to Moshe's leadership.
They didn't pray. The Bnei Israel did not pray for rescue. They're horrified. They're terrified. There's an army of hundreds of
Chariots.
armored chariots and all that business coming down upon them. They don't have any weapons that are comparable at all.
No, not that.
And they don't know what to do other than turn to the nearest representative of the power they don't understand, they're not sure about, and that's Moshe.
Right.
And in a way, they're ascribing to Moshe the power of being God.
Yeah. So I mean, it's interesting.
There's a kind of idolatrous thing here.
Yes, perhaps there are those who make a very clear distinction and say, no, well, they did pray to God. Vayitzaku b'nei Yisrael el Hashem. They cried out to God. They offered a prayer, and then they complained to Moshe, or simultaneously they complained to Moshe. So
But it's also interesting they're saying to Moshe, "You took us out of Egypt," but that's not true. They went out of Egypt after the miracles.
okay.
The plagues, by the way, the plagues were mostly against rather than for. I think in their mind's eye, I think that the plagues are against the Egyptians.
Right.
But what they need now is not a plague against, a miracle against.
Right. So that's a really good point, right? Who was the audience of the plagues? And really, we've spoken in previous years that there were multiple audiences, and that, right, is just as much as the plagues were meant to punish the Egyptians for what they had done to the Jews. It was also meant to raise awareness of God among the Egyptians, but more importantly, among Bnei Yisrael, among the Jewish people. That the point of the plagues was for the Jews to come to recognize God. Remember, it starts out when Moshe and Aaron first come to them. They say, prove to us that this is God who sent you, right? And so the part of it is Bnei Yisrael is also coming to recognize and believe in God, and seemingly that didn't work so well. This is what their reaction to Moshe is a week later, right? That they, their faith is still in development. We can say more charitably. Then at the end of this passage, right? Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, ma titzak elai. God says to Moshe, "Why are you screaming out to me?" So first of all, what is Moshe screaming out? Where do we see that?
I don't think we do.
We don't. Correct, Judy. We don't. We don't see Moshe saying anything to Hashem, right? Most assume that he, the only thing he could do, he was immersed in prayer of some sort, and And Hashem is saying, this is not the time for prayer. What's the more appropriate response according to Hashem at this moment? Daber b'nei Yisrael v'yisaru. Speak to b'nei Yisrael and they should go forth. Where are they supposed to go?
Into the water.
Into the water.
Yep.
Does that seem like like you would follow those directions? If you were
Rather than
there?
go back to Egypt, absolutely.
Okay,
Mm.
okay,
Absolutely. A fast death as opposed to a slow lingering one. Uh-huh.
okay.
No more Jewish babies thrown into the Nile.
Hmm.
They're in the Red Sea instead.
Right. So it's quite interesting. It's quite interesting, right? But many pick up on the fact, what's Hashem telling Moshe? Don't cry out to me. Is there a more apropos time for prayer than this moment, when you're literally stuck between an ocean and an army with nowhere to go? How is prayer inappropriate here?
Complaints are inappropriate, but prayer is not.
Complaints are inappropriate. So maybe Hashem's saying maybe Hashem is telling Moshe,
There you go.
it's not don't pray to me, but don't scream out, don't complain to me. But in which case he should say, say the right words, offer prayer. So it's a very interesting, troubling passage that we encounter here. Hashem's response to this whole episode is equally as troubling and puzzling. And then we have the question of the Or HaChaim. In source number 2, I'll give you the English, and again, someone please tell me when I need to scroll down. So the Or HaChaim says, Vikasha, Hashem Elokav. Who else are Moshe supposed to scream to? Right? This is the exact appropriate thing that a religious believing person should do. Ubi prat be'etzara, especially at a time of trouble. Ichtiv karata mitzara li, min ha'metzar karata ya. Right? We have verses all over Tanakh that say at a time of trouble, call out to God. That's the most appropriate thing to do. And if the complaint or Hashem's criticism is that he's praying too much, that the prayer has to be combined with action, well, he says the prayer still hasn't been answered. So Moshe should continue to pray until he gets some positive response. And when Hashem tells Moshe to instruct Bnei Israel to go forth, where are they supposed to go? The enemy is on one side and the sea is on the other side. There's literally nowhere for them to go. And if he means once the sea is split, then they should go. So Hashem's first instruction to Moshe should have been raise your hand so that we could begin this miracle. And then you could tell them, once the sea is split, tell them to go into the sea. Okay, so this is, he asked the same questions that we asked. And the answer that he gives is an interesting answer. We're not going to do the whole thing, but he basically says that we have a very strong tradition that says at the time of the splitting of the sea, right, the Gemara Brachot says that the angels point out to Hashem, halalu of the avodah zarah, halalu of the avodah zarah. Both the Egyptians and Bnei Israel are idolaters. Bnei Israel didn't have any merit in their name. They were just as immersed in sin, right? The tradition that says that they were at the 49th level of tuma, of impurity, when the Exodus took place, and if they would have gone one level lower, they would have been to the point of no return. So these were not tzaddikim. These were not people that had any merits or anything that would have brought about their salvation. So the Or HaChaim says, in order for Hashem to treat them with midat harachamim, with the attribute of mercy, they had to do something to tip the scales in their favor. So they had to take that step of faith, even though there was no logical thing to do. They needed to show that they were bought into following Hashem by taking a step into the sea even before it split. And then once they tipped the scales, in their favor, then Hashem could bring about the miracle of the splitting of the sea. It's an interesting explanation. Quite, raises a lot, but I brought it more for his questions than for his specific approach to it, but it gives us a lot to think about. What I really wanted to focus on, though, is we've encountered many times before the writings of Rabbi Held, and I think that he has a beautiful explanation of what's going on here, about why God tells Moshe to stop praying, to stop calling out to him, and to go. They should go forth. So he says that the most essential characteristic of a slave is the slave has no agency, no capacity to shape his or her own fate. Slaves do as they are told, lest they be beaten or dehumanized further. Although they work hard, they are passive, because in no sense are they the authors of their own lives. In order to go from slavery to freedom, in order to be truly transformed, in other words, they have agency, that they can act in small ways and in large to determine their own fate. Angry and afraid, longing for the familiar, they cry out to God and lash out at Moshe. In response, Moshe unwittingly gives them instructions that undermine the very journey they are on. He tells them, in effect, be passive, sit back and watch what God does. But being totally passive is not the way to reassert their dignity. Rather than being urged to fight for themselves, either literally or figuratively, they are told to be still and wait for God to act. Furthermore, Moshe's admonition, be still, may well suggest that not just that the Israelites be silent, but that they adopt a posture of passivity and inactivity. Moshe telling them, don't worry, God will take care of it, is perpetuating the very mentality that defined their servitude in Egypt. Moshe saying, God will take care of it. You don't need to do anything. Just sit back and relax. Everything's taken care of. Continues that slave mentality that they're supposed to be breaking. They're supposed to be emerging out of it. So Rabbi Held concludes, God rejects those instructions. Moshe, God says in effect, don't tell them to be passive. On the contrary, tell them to go forward. Otherwise, we will never get anywhere in teaching them to be free and helping them to restore their dignity. You can't leave Egypt, not really, until you discover that you can take responsibility for your life and affect your own fate. Okay, so this is obviously a very difficult test to put this to the practice. But what he's saying, the way that he's reading the story, is that Hashem is telling Moshe the only way that this will have any success is if they take some step on their own. They can't be sitting around waiting for a miracle to happen all the time. Yes, miracles will happen. Miracles did happen to this people, but they cannot be reliant on that. They have to take some ownership over their own story, over their own fate. And that's what he says is the key factor going on in this passage that we just read from the Parsha. Any thoughts or reactions to that?
Does this fall under the heading of what's called hishtadlut or hishtadlis?
Most definitely. Most definitely. Right. This is a much starker example of the story of the person caught in a flood, caught in a hurricane. They're sitting on the roof. The house is flooded, and the first rescue boat comes by, and they say, "No, it's okay. God is going to save me." And then the helicopter comes, and they say, "It's okay. I don't need you to rescue me. God's going to take care of it." Ultimately, this person dies, goes up to heaven, and Hashem says to Hashem, "What happened? I thought you were going to save me." God says, "I tried to save you 3 times, and you rejected it, every one." Right? You need to put in some effort as well. So that's it's some version of that story.
I really like this a lot. It helps to explain another interesting problem, and that is why the word Beshalach. Why did Paro have to really send us out
Right.
with the Davish and the Lamed,
Right.
Oh, you gotta go. I mean, you can see that big goad, that is the Lamed, get out of here. Why is this happening? Why does that have to be? So there's a concept of sort of a difference between being freed from slavery and really sniffing freedom. And once one really does, then everything can change. And that's what I think this is about. I think it's a wonderful answer.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you.
But also, in a sense, they're already on this journey. I mean, they took the first step by leaving. And so now they have the agency and they need to continue on that path that they've started.
Right. So that's the point Ann just made, is that the parsha opens by Beshalach Paro et ha'am, or when Paro sent the nation, meaning that even after the 10 plagues, even when Paro said go, they still weren't really totally bought in, that Paro had to actively cast them away and send them out. So yeah, you're right. On a simple level, they have already taken the first step. They've already agreed, right, to follow God into the desert. But clearly they still have, it's still a work in progress. Okay, so this ties in nicely to a midrashic account that I'm sure we're familiar with, maybe not all the details of it, but that is the role of Nachshon ben Aminadav in the splitting of the sea. The Gemara in Sota actually gives us two versions of what was happening. So, Haya Rabbi Meir Omer. Sorry, let me scroll down. So picking up in the second line, Rabbi Meir would say, Shamdi Yisrael Hayam Hayu Shvatim Minatzchim Ze Im Ze. Ze Omer Ani Yorei Tchila Layam, Ze Omer Ani Yorei Tchila Layam. When they came to the sea and they were stuck here, the tribes started fighting with each other. And one of them said, I want to go into the sea first. And the other one said, no, I want to go into the sea first. Kafatz Shifto Shel Binyamin V'yarad L'Yam Tchila. The tribe of Benjamin just took a step, stepped in and went into the sea first. Shne'emar Sham Binyamin Sa'ir Rodim. It says in Tehillim, Binyamin Sa'ir, Benjamin the youngest, Rodim, ruled over them. It says Alti Krei Rodim Ela Rad Yam. Don't read it as Rodim ruled over them, but rather Rad or Yarad Yam. He went into the sea. Yusarei Yehuda Rogmimoto. And the leaders of Yehuda were stoning Binyamin. Shne'emar Sarei Yehuda Vigamtam Lefichach Zacha Binyamin HaTzadik V'nasa Ushpitzchan Legvura. Right? And Yehuda got angry. Yehuda is the older. Yehuda, is going to be the leader, the future leader. He starts stoning Benjamin. What are you doing taking my glory? We want to be the ones to bring about the miracle. We want to be the ones to show our faith. And so that's in this version why Benjamin ultimately merited to have the temple built in their tribal inheritance as reward for going into the sea first. That's according to Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda, Marlo Rabbi Yehuda, lo kach haya maaseh ela kach, ela zeh omer ein ani yorei tchila layam, zeh omer ein ani yorei tchila layam. Rabbi Yehuda says you got the story wrong. They weren't fighting over who was going to go in first, but they all said, I don't want to go in first. They were all denying, they were all rejecting the opportunity to bring about the miracle. Hafatz Nachshon ben Aminadav v'yarad layam tchila. So this is what we're familiar with. Nachshon at that moment jumped in and took the lead. Shne'emar Svavuni b'chacha shefayim u'v'imat beit Yisrael v'Yehuda ad Ram im el Ra. Okay, okay. Tosha'a haya Moshe. I'm skipping down a couple lines. Haya Moshe ma'arich b'tfilah. At that time, Moshe, as the tribes are all fighting and not wanting to jump in, and finally Nachshon steps up. During that time, Moshe was praying. Amar lo Kadosh Baruch Hu, Yidiyai tovim bayam v'ata ma'arich b'tfilah. So God says, my beloved is drowning in the sea, and this is when you're immersed in saying a long prayer. Amar lo fanav ribono shel olam uma biyadi lasot. So Moshe says, what else am I supposed to do? Amar lo daber b'nei Yisrael v'yisau. So God tells him, speak to Bnei Yisrael, and they should go forth. And so God says you should tell them to go forth and then raise up your arms, and the sea will split and the miracle will happen. Okay, so we're all familiar, I think, with the notion that Nachshon was the one to go in first. This is where that comes from. Interestingly, that there's actually two versions of the story told in the Gemara. The Nachshon version seems to have one out, seems to have one today. That's only the most popular one. And it gets carried forth in number 5, which is the Midrash commenting on Parshat Naso, when the Nesiim, when the tribes each give their offerings in the dedication of the Mishkan. This is what we read for each day of Hanukkah. And the first one to offer their sacrifice was Nachshon ben Aminadav Lamate Yehuda. Lama nikro shmo Nachshon. Why was his name Nachshon? Al Shem she'yarad tchila leNachshol bayam. Since he went first to the bank of the sea. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu leMoshe Nisha kidesh et shmi bayam hu yakriv tchila. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says that God tells Moshe, he who sanctified my name at the sea by going in first, he should be the first one to offer sacrifice in the dedication of the Mishkan. Okay, so we have, building our pieces together. Again, we have this curious incident as Bnei Israel are seemingly trapped at the banks of the sea. God tells Moshe, this is not the time to daven. They should take action. They should take a step. What's the reason that God says this? We saw Rabbi Held explaining it's in order that Bnei Israel not continue with the slave mentality that everything is just going to happen to them, but they have to take some ownership, some authorship over their own life experience. And this is best embodied by Nachshon, who takes the first plunge into the sea. Okay, so now we're going to pick up with further in Rabbi Held. He says, let's not kid ourselves. The story of Exodus is not primarily a story celebrating human effort and enterprise. It's a narrative of thunderous divine intervention about a God who enters history to vanquish the course of cruelty and barbarism. That is precisely what makes God's words to Moshe so powerful. Even, and perhaps especially, in the midst of a story about divine power, the Torah works to make space for human initiative. Only if the Israelites find the courage to move forward will God save them. God's miracles are, in some fundamental sense, depending upon prior human effort. As Jewish mystics are fond of saying, without a stirring from below, there can be no stirring from above. Even in an age when God splits seas, the Torah places tremendous emphasis on human beings taking the first step. God will not save the Israelites unless and until they are willing to go forward into the unknown. The sea will not split until someone is intrepid enough to proceed. It is only once the Israelites act boldly and dauntlessly that God's miraculous intervention sets in. In order for the Israelites to leave slavery behind, existentially and not just politically, they must learn to take their fate into their own hands and thereby to rediscover their capacity to act and make an impact upon the world and upon their lives within it. And then he concludes with the lesson for us in our day. Times have changed. In our day, God does not split seas or accompany Israel in a cloud. God's presence is more subtly and elusive, and God's involvement more mysterious. If, in a time when God's saving presence was manifest, people were nevertheless called upon to take matters into their own hands, all the more so we are required to do so now, in a time when God's presence is hidden or even absent. What was necessary in biblical times, therefore, is all the more urgent today. People are called upon to refuse passivity as a religious posture. Okay, we have to, it's a fine line, obviously, because if you take this too far, you might come to the conclusion, which the Muserniks are always arguing against, of that it's my own strength, my own power that I achieve whatever it is that I achieve. We need to have that balance between, yes, what Robert identified as ishtadlus, putting in our own efforts, but also, right, maintaining the recognition and an awareness that ultimately everything is directed and comes from Hashem, and we're dependent totally on Hashem, but we're dependent on Hashem and must put in our own efforts and do make a proper proper steps forward on our own as well. So it's a difficult balance, but he says this is the enduring message, the lesson of the splitting of the sea, of the story that we just read. This is kind of part one, so I'll pause if any questions or reflections on what we've said up until now.
Makes me wonder if the Rambam had this pasuk in mind when he said that a person does one good deed, one mitzvah, it can tip the whole balance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
You
for
happen
sure.
to know if that was part of what it may have inspired that thought. I don't know enough about
It certainly informs it. It certainly is a story in some sense. Certainly, if we read it this way, a story of tshuva, a story of coming to recognize and come closer to God. Whether the Rambam specifically had this in mind, I couldn't tell you that.
Okay. Revolutions, very often, from what I know, are started by one individual or only a few people. We learned this morning in the story about Moscow Jews about a band of 12, 14 youth that got together and actually they started the revolution against the dictatorship of Russia.
Yeah, you mean the refuseniks?
The original.
This is the 1970s. Yeah, there was a group, and one group was from Georgia,
Right.
and they went into a building, but there was one before them. But in each case, it was like 7 people or 6 people the first time, and like 10 people the next time, and that was it. That just sparked the whole refusenikism.
Right. Mark Twain, in one of his fables, it's in England, I guess, and the people are sort of serfs or slaves or something. They have no initiative for anything, and he senses that, and he tries to get them. Or anyway, he has a view like what we're seeing here of people that don't have a spirit, that are just do nothing.
Right.
Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court is probably the book
Very
that
good.
you're
Yeah, I think so. Right.
A couple of things occurred to me, a way to reconcile those two ideas about who jumped into the water first. Benjamin was the tribe of the first king of Israel, but Yehuda was the one who established it and kept it going. So maybe that's a way to...
Yeah, for sure. The Medrash picks up on that later historical phenomenon. And that's present throughout the Midrashic literature. Yeah.
I can't remember. Is Rabbi Held based in Israel or here?
No, he's in New York. He teaches
He's
at
in New York.
Hadar.
Okay.
He teaches at Hadar. Yeah.
And the other thing I seem to recall, am I right or wrong about this? Was Nachshon ben Aminadav Moshe's brother-in-law?
Yes.
Yes.
He's the one who was married to Miriam. So kind of, okay, Moshe said it, and his brother-in-law is like leading the charge, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's kind of part one, and then I wanted to use what we established here to look at an interesting phenomenon, I think, in the Shirat Hayam and the other shirot, the other songs that we encounter. So Shirat Hayam, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but just to remind us, Az Yasher Moshe v'nei Sot Eshrazol Hashem v'yimu le'imor Asher Hashem ki kol da'ah Sitra Choram Avayam Ozi Uzimat Yah Hashem v'yihili l'shua Ze'ili v'andeo Le'yavi v'amenu Hashem Yishmo Chama Hashem Shemo, etc., etc., etc. Moshe and the Israelites sing the song of the Lord. They said, I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver he has hurled into the sea. The Lord is my strength and might. He became my deliverance. This is my God, and I will enshrine him. The God of my father, I will exalt him. The Lord, the warrior, the Lord his name, etc., etc. Okay, so that's Shirat Hayam. It should be familiar to us from our regular davening. Shabbos and weekdays, we include Shirat Hayam. If we, again, it's not looking good for us to be in shul together this week, but it's sung in a special trope during reading in shul. Very beautiful, very powerful. The second shirah, the next shirah we encounter in Chumash, is a much shorter one. It's often overlooked. So Miriam is kind of included with this one. Okay, I included those psukim at the end, but Miriam's inclusion of the women dancing The next one is in Sefer Bamidbar, in Parshat Chukat. Okay, so this is describing they are traveling in the desert. Again, there's no water. This is the second time that Moshe and Aaron are instructed to speak to rock and wind up hitting the rock. And after that drama unfolds, they come and they find a well in the desert. And they have the following. The English is displayed. So from there they went to Be'era, which is the well where God told Moshe, gather the nation, I will give them water. Az Yashir Yisrael et Hashira Hazot, Ali Be'er Anula. And then the Israelites sing the following song, Ali Be'er Anula, oh well, sing to it. Be'er chafaru hasarim karua nedive'am infokik bemishonotam mimibar matana. The well which the chieftains dug, which the nobles of the people started, with maces, with their own staffs, and from midbar to matana, and mimibar matana, and from midbar to matana. This is read midrashically, umimibar matana, from the desert. Matana, it was a gift. Matana being the name of a place and also meaning gift. Matana nachliel, minachliel bit bamot, and from matana to nachliel, from nachliel to bamot. Okay, what's going on in this second shira, the next shira that we encounter in Chumash? What's anything similar to the Shira Tayam?
It's not talking about God at all.
Okay, it's not talking about God at all. That's the main difference that many people identify, right? Shirat Hayam, the song at the sea, is all about God's involvement in the miracle that Hashem made, right? It's all about Hashem is this, Hashem is the warrior, Hashem drowned them, Hashem did this miracle for us. In this second Shira, it seems, again, this was a well that they seemingly stumbled upon. It was a gift from God, but they're giving themselves all the credit. The chieftains dug the well. It was a well that was created and dug by humans, and that seems to be it. So there's no recognition of God's involvement in this well. And then we come to a third Shira. There are other songs or other Shirot in Tanakh, but I specifically go to Shirat Devorah, the Song of Devorah, because that is the Haftorah of this parsha, right? In Shul we'll be reading this Haftorah. It's a very long Haftorah, but we read the entire Shira in the Ashkenazic tradition. But the Shirat Devorah is often seen as kind of a corrective or the proper balance between the two.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we're not going to look at the entire thing, but the Song of Devorah, she balances. She recognizes the need to praise and thank God for the victory that the Israelites have against Midian. But she also goes in and describes that the warriors fought and Yael brought about the salvation. And she recognizes both Hashem's role and the human effort that went in to ensuring the victory. And so if we skip down to number 11, this is said much better by others than by myself. But again, so the basic theory is that Shirat Hayam, the song that we read about at the splitting of the sea, falls short in that it still has, even despite what we saw from Rabbi Held, it still has Bnei Israel being totally passive. Right? The entire praise, the entire song at the sea is about God's bringing about the miracle, the salvation that God did. There is no human anything in that song. On the other extreme, we have the Shirat HaBe'er, the song of the well, in which case there is no God involvement. They don't recognize Hashem's role at all. And then finally, Shirat Devorah tells us the proper way that we should be offering Shira, that we should be offering thanks to Hashem, and that is through the proper balance, recognizing and thanking God for the miracles that God did, but also giving credit to the humans who helped bring about the miracle and recognizing the human effort that took place. Okay, so Rabbi Michael Haddon, who teaches in Yeshivat Har Etzion and other places, I think he teaches at Pardes among other places. He writes as follows, source number 11, I went too far. There is in effect only one single subject that is discussed in the Song at the Sea, that is God's saving might, present and future. God overthrew the Egyptians, God foiled Pharaoh's nefarious plan, God will lead his people to Canaan and overwhelm the surrounding nations hostile to Israel's mission. Ultimately, God will prevail. According to the song's central theme, Israel's role in securing its salvation was and is correspondingly small. Devorah's hymn, on the other hand, while certainly neither negating God's intervention nor downplaying it, nevertheless acknowledges the role of numerous human characters in the victory. While she gratefully and sincerely sings of God's involvement, she also notes her own, her fighters, and especially Yael's selfless heroism. In one memorable couplet, Devorah even blurs the distinction between them, crediting all of them with securing the triumph together. Arise, arise, Devorah, arise, and speak song, get up, Barak, and take your captive son of Avinoam. Then a remnant ruled over the mighty among nations. God gave me dominion over the powerful. Okay, so this is the proper way in which to utter Shirah, in which to utter song. And finally, we have Rabbi Bazak. I think his work, I only have the Hebrew version of it, but I believe it's recently been translated to English. I very much love what he writes, and if anyone's looking for a good reader on the Parshat HaShavua, Rabbi Bazak's book is excellent. It's just been put into English by Koren. I'm sure Shopsies has it available. You can get it on the Koren website. We'll just read this is my translation. This is not the published English translation that's recently been released. But he says, comparing Shirat Hayam and Shirat HaBe'er, the song at the sea, with the song of the well. The song at the sea was said at the initiation of Moshe, and he is the central figure. Then Moshe and the Israelites sing this song to the Lord. The parsha of the splitting of the sea is one that is entirely done by God. The Israelites have no part in it. This mode of behavior is appropriate for the era of the desert, in which God goes before them and there is not creative activity or taking of responsibility expected of the people. Rabbi Held disagrees on that point. In contrast, the second generation, poised to enter the land, go through a process of struggles in which they are more and more active, leading towards, quote, natural or non-miraculous life. For this reason, the song of the well is said only by the Israelites, even though it includes praise of God for having given them water without any complaints first. Nonetheless, it emphasizes the role of the Israelites in the well which the chieftains dug. From now on, the Israelites take on a more significant role, which is given expression in the next section, the ensuing narrative in Sefer Bamidbar. Israel sent messengers to Sichon, the king of Emor. In contrast to what had happened previously, Moshe sent messengers to the king of Edom. Okay, so again, putting this all together, we have, I think, through the story first of Bnei Israel's seemingly entrapment at the banks of the sea, followed by the salvation or Hashem's response to how they deal with that initial seeming trap, and followed by Shirat Hayam, what is at least a vision, even if it's not played out in reality, of what the proper religious posture and attitude and approach should be. That we need to have recognition of God, of course, but that there needs to be, with that, human initiative, and it can't be all passive. You can't write, there's a famous rabbinic phrase, Ein somchim al hanes. You do not rely on a miracle. You cannot be totally passive, assuming God will take care of everything for you. If you put in your efforts, then hopefully miracles will happen if we're not able to bring salvation on our own. But there has to be that balance between recognizing God's hand and taking our own human initiative as well. So it's again not I don't think a radical chiddush, a radical novel insight for any of us, but an important lesson. I think an interesting analysis of this seemingly troubling passage at the beginning of the scene at the Red Sea. Are there any final questions or thoughts?
There's a nice kesher between what you said about Devorah's song and also about Moshe's song and the Tu B'Shvat Seder. because the third fruit that we will discuss stands for the prophetess Devorah, and it's Tiferet, harmony, balance. And the fourth one is Netzach, connected with the fig, endurance, victory, longevity, and so on. So these two figures and their songs actually fit in very nicely with those concepts that we will discuss when we get to the Tu B'Shvat season.
Okay, and with that in mind, everyone is encouraged to join us, please. Sunday evening is the time. I'm not sure if the time has been set. 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock Sunday evening for the Tu B'Shvat Seder. Baskets or packages with the appropriate foods and materials will be delivered to your homes, and we're looking forward to that. And we'll see everyone. Still holding out hope for Shabbos, although it's not likely at this point, given how things look. But if not, then Sunday night and then next Tuesday evening as well. Have a good night. Have a good rest of the week.
Rabbi,
Yes.
Rabbi, what are the 4 things? I think 3 or 4 things that we say on Pesach. One is the Exodus, and one is
Pesach, Matzah,
freedom.
The 4 cups, you mean?
No. So statements of one is the Exodus and one is freedom.
Pesach, Matzah, and Maror.
No.
Hotzeti, Hitzalti, Ga'alti, Lakachti.
He took us out and he
He
redeemed
took us
us.
out. Hotzeti, he saved us.
Yeah.
Hotzeti, Hitzalti, I redeemed you. Lakachti, I took you for my nation.
Okay, I thought that there was one labeling or that the people themselves do rather than being free. I don't know. I'll look it up.
Nothing's coming to me now. Okay, if it comes to anyone, let us all know.
To go into the Haggadahs. All right.
All right.
Yeah.
Have a good night, everybody. We'll see you
Thank
soon.
you so much.
So,
Rabbi.
thank
That's
you.
all.
Be well.
Everybody.
Thank you.